The great hall reeked of incense and old blood. Elara stood chained between two marble pillars, wrists raw from iron. 6 years of silence had taught her how to disappear inside her own skin, but tonight the court wanted her visible. They always did when someone needed to be reminded what happened to those who spoke against the crown. King Vortigern lounged on the obsidian throne, fingers drumming the armrest. His eyes, cold amber, fixed on her, with something that wasn't quite hatred, almost regret. The thought tasted like ash. A guard shoved her forward. She stumbled, but caught herself, lifting her chin. "Not yet," she told the fire flickering in her veins. "Not here. Elara Voss," the herald announced, accused of spreading treasonous lies about the fall of House Ronan. The name still cut. Prince Ronan, her childhood shadow, the boy who once promised her the stars, had vanished the night the palace burned. Along with her voice, Vortigern rose slowly. "You were warned." She met his gaze. For the first time in 6 years, she didn't look away. Her fingers curled into fists. "If I'm going to die, let it be with my eyes open." The king gestured. 2 men dragged forward a small iron brazier. The blade inside glowed faint orange. Her stomach clenched, but she forced her breathing steady. The crowd leaned in, hungry. This was the moment they always savored. Vortigern stepped close enough that she could smell winter pine and something metallic on his cloak. His voice dropped, meant only for her. "I take no pleasure in this, girl. But some truths are too dangerous to speak, even once." For a heartbeat, something raw flickered behind his eyes, calculation mixed with exhaustion, as if he were protecting a secret far larger than her small rebellion, as if her words had brushed against something he could not allow to surface. Elara's heart slammed against her ribs. "What are you hiding?" She made her choice. Instead of shrinking back like the broken mute they expected, she lunged forward the half-step her chains allowed and spat at his feet. The crowd gasped. A guard struck her across the face, splitting her lip. But she laughed, silent, furious, defiant. Vortigern's jaw tightened. "So be it." The executioner gripped her jaw with rough fingers. Cold steel pressed against her tongue. The heat from the blade kissed her skin. Pain flared sharp and bright, but she refused to close her eyes. She stared straight at the king the entire time. "Remember this," she screamed inside. "Remember what you did." When it was over, blood coated her chin. The world tilted. But through the haze, she saw it, Vortigern's hand clenched so hard on the throne arm that his knuckles whitened. Not triumph, not satisfaction. Something closer to fear. They dragged her away like a discarded rag. As the heavy doors slammed shut behind her, Elara pressed her bleeding mouth to the cold stone floor and made a silent vow. She would find out why the king had truly silenced her. And when she did, she would make sure the entire kingdom heard the truth this time with more than just her voice. The dungeon breathed like a living thing. Cold stone pressed against Elara's back. Every swallow dragged fire through the ruin of her mouth. Blood had dried in stiff lines down her chin, but she no longer tasted it. She tasted only the question the king had left behind. Some truths are too dangerous to speak. She sat up slowly, chains clinking. The straw beneath her was damp and stank of old urine and despair. 6 years of silence had taught her to listen to rooms instead of filling them. This one whispered of things left unfinished. Her fingers found a jagged stone jutting from the wall. She dragged it across the surface until the name took shape in uneven scratches. Ronan. The letters stared back at her. The boy who had once pressed a stolen apple into her hand and called her Little Shadow. The prince whose death had been declared an accident the same night the West Wing burned. The night she had tried to tell someone what she saw. No one had listened. Until tonight. Footsteps. Not the heavy, careless tread of guards. These were measured. Purposeful. The lock turned with a soft, metallic sigh. King Vortigern stepped into the cell carrying a single lantern. No escort, no torchlight procession, just him and the flickering circle of light that made the shadows on his face look deeper than they had in the great hall. Elara did not lower her gaze. He studied her for a long moment, the way one might study a wound that refused to close. "You should have stayed quiet," he said at last. His voice was low, meant for stone walls and bloodstains. 6 years. You managed it. Then one night you decide the dead need defending. She pointed at the name carved into the wall, then at her own ruined mouth, then back at him. The gesture was small, deliberate. A question shaped like defiance. Vortigern's eyes flicked to the letters. Something moved behind his amber gaze. Calculation. Yes, but also a flicker of exhaustion that looked almost like grief. He set the lantern on the floor between them. The light painted both their faces in gold and blood. "You think you remember that night," he said. "You think you know why the prince died. You were a child. You saw smoke and screams and filled the gaps with stories." Elara pushed herself to her feet. The chains pulled at her wrists, but she took the single step they allowed. Close enough to smell winter pine and cold iron on his cloak, close enough that if she wanted to, she could have reached out and touched the line of his jaw. She chose not to. Instead, she lifted her bound hands and pressed her fingertips, still sticky with her own blood, against the edge of his sleeve. Not a strike, not a plea. Just contact. Proof that she was still breathing, still asking. The king went very still. For 3 heartbeats, the only sound was the drip of water somewhere behind the stones. Then his hand closed around her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, hard enough to stop her. His thumb rested over her pulse, feeling it hammer against his skin. "Curiosity like yours gets people killed," he murmured. "It already cost you your voice. Do not make it cost more." She met his eyes without blinking. "Then stop hiding the truth." Something raw crossed his face, too quick to name. Not anger, not quite fear. Something older. He released her wrist as though her skin had burned him. He turned to leave. At the threshold he paused, back to her, shoulders rigid beneath the dark cloak. "The West Wing was not the only thing that burned that night," he said, without looking back. "Some fires are still burning. Stay out of them, Elara Voss, or I will not be able to stop what comes next." The door closed. The lock turned. Elara sank back onto the straw, wrist throbbing where his fingers had been. She could still feel the heat of his touch. She could still hear the crack in his voice on the last sentence. He had come alone. He had answered almost, and he was afraid. She smiled through the pain, small and sharp and private. The fire that had flickered in her veins during the cutting had not gone out. It had simply gone quiet. She would make it speak again. This time, she would choose when. The fever dragged her under like black water. Elara lay on the damp straw, wrists chained, jaw swollen shut around what remained of her tongue. The cut throbbed with every heartbeat, a wet, constant pulse that made the stone walls tilt. She tasted iron and rot. The dungeon smelled of mold and old piss, and the sour fear of every prisoner who had ever waited here for judgment that never came. She pressed her cheek to the cold floor and let the chill fight the heat rising behind her eyes. In the blur, she saw the orchard again, sunlight through leaves. Ronan laughing, 12 years old, juice sticky on his chin. He had stolen the apple from the king's own tree and held it out to her like it was nothing. "Take it, little shadow." Before they notice, the fruit had been warm, skin tight under her fingers, sweet enough to make her forget she was only the daughter of a kitchen maid, and he was the boy everyone said would one day wear the crown. She had bitten into it, and the juice had run down her wrist. He had wiped it away with the edge of his sleeve, still laughing. That was the last time she had tasted anything sweet without guilt. The memory burned now. She opened her eyes to real darkness. The lantern the king left had long since died. Only the thin line of torchlight from the corridor slit reached her. She sat up slowly. The chains pulled at raw skin. Pain lanced through her jaw when she swallowed. She lifted her bound hands and stared at the iron links until they blurred. Try again. The thought was not words. It was heat under her ribs, the same spark that had answered when the executioner's blade touched her tongue. She closed her eyes and reached for it, the way she once reached for high branches, careful, afraid it would snap. Nothing. She tried again, slower, picturing the metal softening the way wax melts near flame. This time the fire answered in a thin, reluctant thread. It moved through her arms and gathered at her wrists like a held breath. The leftmost link glowed dull red. Elara clenched her teeth against the scream that wanted to tear free. The pain in her jaw flared so bright the world whitened at the edges. One drop of molten iron hissed onto the straw and went out. The link was blackened, not broken, but it had changed. She had done that, with nothing but will and whatever lived inside the silence they forced on her. She did not stop. Sweat slid down her spine. The fever made the walls breathe. She pictured Ronan's face the night the West Wing burned smoke in his hair, eyes wide with something that had not been fear until the very end. She pictured the king's hand on her wrist in this same cell, thumb over her pulse, the flicker of something almost like regret in his amber eyes. The fire inside her surged hotter. Another link glowed. This one cracked with a soft metallic pop. Footsteps, not the king's measured tread. These were lighter, quicker. A guard. The door opened. A tray hit the floorboard. Thin broth, water that already smelled stale. The young guard did not look at her. He never did. She was the mute girl who had dared speak treason and paid with her tongue. Nothing more. She waited until he turned to leave. Then she reached out, chained hands steady, and caught the rough edge of his sleeve between two fingers. He froze. Elara held on. Not hard, just enough to make him feel the weight of her touch. The guard's head snapped around. His eyes were wide, pock-marked face pale in the torchlight. He saw the blackened chain. He saw the small scorch mark on the straw. He saw her looking straight at him without flinching. She let go. He stumbled back, tray forgotten, and slammed the door so hard the iron rang like a struck bell. The sound echoed down the corridor long after his boots had fled. Alone, Elara leaned her head against the wall. The small victory tasted like ash and blood. She had moved. She had made something happen that the court had not ordered. But the guard would talk. The king would hear that the girl he had silenced could still burn. What would he do when he learned the fire had not died with her voice? She closed her eyes. The fever pulled harder now. In the dark, she saw Ronan's apple turn black in her palm again, juice running red down her wrist like the blood that had filled her mouth during the cutting. She saw the king's face when he had stood in this cell, alone, telling her some truths were too dangerous. She felt again the heat of his thumb on her pulse. Longing and fear twisted together until she could not tell which was which. Above her, boots were already moving toward the dungeon stairs. She opened her eyes and stared at the cracked link. This time she did not hide what she had done. She waited. The footsteps reached the door before she could decide whether to hide the cracked link or leave it as proof. The lock turned. 2 guards entered first, torches raised, faces tight with the kind of fear that spreads fast in stone corridors. Behind them came the king. Vortigern wore no crown, only a dark cloak over plain black, as though he had come straight from somewhere he did not want the court to see. His eyes went straight to the blackened iron on her wrist, then to the scorch mark on the straw. He did not speak. The guards shifted, waiting for the order to drag her out or finish what the blade had started. Elara stayed where she was, back against the wall, hands visible. The fever still burned under her skin, but the fire inside her felt different now, awake, listening. She met the king's gaze and held it. No cowering, no plea, only the question she could not speak. "What are you so afraid I will remember?" One of the guards stepped forward, hand on his sword. Vortigern lifted 2 fingers. The man froze. "Leave us." The guards hesitated. The king's voice was quiet, but the kind of quiet that ends arguments. They backed out. The door closed. The lantern he carried cast the same circle of light it had the night before, only now it caught the faint red glow still clinging to the cracked link on her chain. Vortigern set the lantern down between them. He did not come closer. For a moment he simply looked at her, at the blood dried on her chin, at the chain she had damaged with nothing but will. "You were supposed to break?" he said at last. "Most do." She lifted her bound hands and let the cracked link catch the light. The metal was still warm. She had not hidden it. She had chosen not to. The king's jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes. Calculation, yes, but also the same raw exhaustion she had seen when he stood in this cell the first time. He took 1 step forward, then stopped, as though the air between them had thickened. "Do you know what that fire is?" he asked. "Do you know why they cut tongues instead of throats in this kingdom?" Elara did not look away. She pictured Ronan's face in the smoke, the way his eyes had widened, not at the fire but at something behind her. She pictured the king's thumb on her pulse 2 nights ago. The same heat that had answered her then answered her now. Stronger. The cracked link glowed brighter for 1 breath. A thin line of smoke rose from it. Vortigern's hand moved to the hilt of the dagger at his belt. Not to draw, just to touch, as if steadying himself. "Stop," he said. The word was almost gentle. She did not stop. The fire inside her surged once more, deliberate this time. She let it flow into the chain until the crack widened with a soft, singing sound. The link split. 1/2 of the iron fell to the straw. Her left wrist was free. The king did not move. For 3 heartbeats, the only sound was the drip of water and the faint hiss of cooling metal. Then Vortigern exhaled, slow and controlled, like a man who had just watched a blade miss his throat by a finger's width. "You don't understand what you're waking," he said. "That power doesn't belong to you. It never did. It belonged to the ones who burned the West Wing, the ones who made sure Ronan never spoke what he knew." The name hit harder than the fever. She saw again the apple in her hand, juice running red. She saw the smoke. She saw the boy who had once wiped her wrist clean, now staring at her with the same fear the king carried now. Her freed hand trembled. Not from weakness, from the sudden, terrible clarity that the fire inside her had not saved Ronan. It might have been the reason he died. She made her choice. Instead of hiding the broken chain or shrinking back, she reached out with her free hand and pressed her palm flat against the cold stone wall behind her. The fire answered without hesitation this time. A thin web of cracks spread outward from her fingers, glowing faint orange before fading. The stone itself had answered. Vortigern watched the cracks form and die. When he spoke again, his voice was low, almost hoarse. "If you keep doing that, they will come for you. Not the court. The ones who have been waiting since the night the prince disappeared. They will not cut your tongue a 2nd time." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of something that might once have been grief, close enough that if she lifted her free hand, she could touch the edge of his cloak again. "I cannot protect you if you keep burning," he said. "But I can give you 1 chance to walk out of this cell alive. Choose now. Hide what you are, or keep waking it and face what comes." Elara looked at the broken chain on the floor, then at the web of cracks on the wall, then at the king who had ordered her silenced, and now stood between her and whatever waited beyond these stones. She lifted her freed hand, not to strike, not to plead. She held it out, palm up, the way Ronan once held out an apple. The fire answered in a single, steady flame no larger than a candle's heart. Vortigern stared at it for a long moment. Then he closed his eyes, just once, like a man accepting a sentence he had tried for years to avoid. When he opened them, the exhaustion was gone. Only decision remained. "Very well," he said. "Then we do this the hard way." He turned toward the door. Before he reached it, he spoke without looking back. "Tomorrow night, when the bells ring for the dead, be ready, and do not burn anything else until then." The door closed behind him. Elara sat in the circle of dying lantern light, one wrist free, the other still chained. The stone wall cracked behind her, like a promise she could not take back. She had chosen. Now the fire would have to keep her alive long enough to learn why the king feared it more than he feared her. The bells had not rung yet. Elara sat in the dark with one wrist free and the other still chained. The cracked link on the floor had cooled to dull iron, but the web of fractures on the wall behind her still felt warm when she pressed her palm to it. She had not touched the fire again. The king's warning sat heavy in the silence. Do not burn anything else until then. She tried to rest. The fever had eased to a low, steady heat, but every swallow still dragged pain through her jaw. She kept seeing the same things behind her closed eyes. Ronan's hand wiping juice from her wrist, the king's thumb on her pulse, the single steady flame she had held out to him like an offering he did not want. Vulnerability was a dangerous thing in a cell. It made her remember too much. It made her wonder what the king had lost the night the West Wing burned. It made her wonder why his voice had gone hoarse when he spoke Ronan's name. She hated that she wondered at all. The guard who brought the next tray was not the young one from before. This one was older, scarred across the cheek, eyes flat. He set the bread and broth down without looking at her freed wrist. When he turned to leave, she spoke or tried to. The sound that came out was only a broken rasp, wet and useless. The guard paused anyway. His shoulders tightened. Elara lifted her free hand slowly and pointed at the wall where the cracks had been. Then she pointed at the door. Then at herself. The gesture was small, clear. "Tell me what waits outside." The man's face did not change, but his hand lingered on the door latch, a fraction longer than it should have. He left without answering. The lock turned. She was alone again with the question, and the faint glow that still lived under her skin. Night passed in fragments. She dozed against the wall and woke to the sound of her own breathing. In the dark, she let herself feel the thing she had been avoiding since the blade, the pull toward the king that had nothing to do with hatred and everything to do with the way he had looked at her when the flame appeared in her palm. Not like she was a threat to be extinguished, like she was a secret he had already tried and failed to bury. She hated that too. When the first light of false dawn crept through the corridor slit, she made her decision. She would not wait for the bells like a prisoner. She would test the limit the king had set, not by burning the remaining chain that would be too obvious. She would burn something smaller, something that could be mistaken for accident or fever. She would leave a mark only he would understand. Elara pressed her free hand to the stone floor. The fire answered at once, eager now that it had tasted air. She let it flow in a thin, controlled thread until a single, perfect circle the size of a coin glowed orange beneath her palm. She held it there until the stone was smooth and blackened, then pulled the heat back. The mark remained, a small, deliberate brand, no larger than the seal on a letter. She covered it with straw. The major choice was not the mark itself. It was what she chose to do next. When the scarred guard returned with the morning tray, she did not point or gesture. She simply looked at him and let the silence stretch until he had to meet her eyes. Then she touched 2 fingers to her own throat, to the place where her voice had been cut away, and shook her head once. The gesture said, "I will not speak again, but I am not broken." The guard's flat gaze flickered. He set the tray down harder than necessary and left without the usual slam. The door closed more quietly this time. She had planted the first seed. By midday, the fever returned in force. She lay on her side, free hand curled around the blackened coin of stone hidden under the straw. Every breath carried the memory of the king's warning, and the strange, unwanted warmth that had lived in his eyes when she showed him the flame. Attraction was the wrong word. It was recognition. Two people who had both lost something to the same fire and were now circling the ashes to see what still lived. She hated how much she wanted to know what he had lost. When the light began to fade again, she heard boots. Not the guards. Heavier. Measured. The door opened. King Vortigern stepped inside alone once more, lantern in hand. He did not look at the tray or the straw. His eyes went straight to her face, then to the place where her freed wrist rested against her knee. "You marked the floor," he said. No accusation, only tired certainty. Elara did not deny it. She lifted the straw with her free hand and let him see the small blackened circle. Then she looked at him and waited. Vortigern set the lantern down. For the first time, he sat on the stone bench across from her instead of standing. The distance between them felt smaller than it should have. "The bells will ring in 2 hours," he said. "For the dead of the West Wing, the court will be occupied. That is when we move. You will come with me. Not as prisoner, not as weapon, as the only person left who might still remember what Ronan tried to tell you before the smoke took him." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low. "But if you burn anything between now and then, if you leave another mark, if you speak even in that ruined voice, they will know, and they will come for both of us. Do you understand what I am offering you?" Elara looked at the small brand on the floor, then at the king who had ordered her tongue cut and now sat in her cell, offering something dangerously close to trust. The fire under her skin answered the question before she could form it. She nodded once. Vortigern exhaled. The sound was almost relief. He stood. Before he reached the door, he spoke without turning. "When the bells begin, be ready to run. And if the fire wakes on its own, let it. But only then." The door closed. Elara sat in the growing dark with one wrist free, a deliberate mark hidden under straw, and the knowledge that in 2 hours she would either walk out of this cell beside the man who had silenced her, or burn with him. She chose to wait, but she did not choose to hide the fire any longer. The bells began to toll just as the last light bled from the corridor slit. Elara rose to her feet the moment the first deep note shook the stones. One wrist still bore the remnant of chain, the other free and tingling with restrained fire. She brushed the straw from the blackened circle on the floor and left it uncovered. No more hiding. The king had offered her a path out. She would take it on her own terms. The door opened without warning. King Vortigern stepped in, cloak swirling around him like spilled ink. No guards this time. Only a short blade at his hip and a hood pulled low. His amber eyes found hers in the dimness. "Now," he said. She stepped forward without hesitation. The broken chain dragged against stone with a soft metallic whisper. He did not offer to remove the rest. She did not ask. They moved together down the narrow passage, his hand hovering near her elbow but never touching. The air grew colder as they climbed hidden stairs carved into the palace foundations. Every step sent fresh pain through her jaw, but the fire in her veins pushed back, steady and awake. They emerged into a forgotten corridor behind the great hall. The bells rang louder here, mourning the dead of the West Wing. Voices drifted from beyond the walls, courtiers gathered for the memorial rite, their murmurs laced with false sorrow. Vortigern pressed his back to the stone and motioned her closer. "Stay in shadow," he whispered. "We cross the outer yard to the old gate. No one must see your face." Elara nodded once, but as they slipped along the passage, something twisted in her chest. The way he moved, protective, almost possessive, stirred the memory of his thumb on her pulse in the cell. The same man who had ordered her tongue cut now risked everything to lead her out. The contradiction burned hotter than any power she carried. They reached a heavy oak door. He lifted the bar. Cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and distant smoke. Freedom tasted like frost on her ruined mouth. Then the trap closed. Torches flared to life across the yard. Dozens of them. Guards in full armor formed a half circle, blades drawn. At their center stood Lord Aldrich, the king's own advisor, his silver hair gleaming like a blade. Behind him, the court spilled out from the great hall nobles in mourning black, eyes wide with shock and hunger. Vortigern froze. "Traitor!" Aldrich called, voice carrying across the yard. "You would free the mute whore who slandered House Ronan. After all these years of silence." Elara's blood turned to ice, then to flame. She stepped out from behind the king before he could stop her. The broken chain clinked loudly in the sudden quiet, every eye fixed on her, on the dried blood at her chin, on the raw scar where her tongue had been, on the faint orange glow already flickering beneath the skin of her free hand. Vortigern reached for her arm. "Elara, don't—" She shook him off. Rage rose so fast it drowned the fear. They had dragged her before the court once before. They had taken her voice. Now they dared call her whore while the man who silenced her tried to play savior. She lifted her free hand, palm open toward the torches. The fire answered like a dam breaking. Flames erupted along the ground in a wide arc, not wild but deliberate. They formed a barrier between her and the nearest guards. Heat rolled outward, gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman screamed. Aldrich's face twisted in triumph. "See? The power of the cursed bloodline awakens. The same power that burned the West Wing and killed Prince Ronan. The king has been protecting her all along." Betrayal hit Elara like a physical blow. She turned on Vortigern. The king stood rigid, face pale in the firelight. His eyes held no denial. Only the same exhausted regret she had seen in the cell. He had known. He had always known what lived inside her. And he had cut out her tongue anyway. Rage blinded her. She shoved him hard with both hands. The remaining chain caught his cloak and tore fabric. He stumbled back, but did not fall. The crowd surged closer, emboldened by the flames that now licked at their boots. "You knew," she tried to scream. Only a broken, guttural rasp emerged, wet, furious, inhuman. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth again. She did not care. She struck him again, fists against his chest. "You knew what I was. You still—" The words would not form, but the fire did. It surged up her arms and wrapped around the remaining chain. Metal screamed as it melted. The last link dropped to the ground in a hiss of steam. Both wrists free now, both hands burning. Vortigern caught her wrists before she could strike again. His grip was iron. His voice meant only for her, cut through the chaos. "I cut your tongue to save your life," he said, low and desperate. "They would have burned you alive the moment they suspected. Ronan died because he tried to protect the same power you carry. I have spent 6 years keeping them from finding you." Aldrich laughed. "Lies. He kept her as his secret weapon. Tonight we end the Ronan bloodline once and for all." The guards advanced. The fire in Elara's veins roared in answer. She tore free from the king's grasp and thrust both hands forward. A wall of flame exploded outward, forcing the soldiers back. Heat singed her own hair. The scent of burning cloth filled the yard. For one terrible moment she felt powerful. Seen. Alive. Then the betrayal sank deeper. The king had not saved her. He had used her silence. He had watched her suffer for 6 years to protect whatever secret bound him to the night Ronan died. She turned on him fully now, flames dancing at her fingertips. The crowd watched in horror and fascination. This was the forced exposure they had never expected. Vortigern did not draw his blade. He simply looked at her, at the rage, at the power, at the blood on her lips, and spoke the words that shattered the last fragile thread between them. "Run, Elara, before they take us both." She laughed then. A silent, broken sound that tore her throat. She would not run. Not like this. Not while the man who had betrayed her still stood breathing. She raised her burning hands toward the king. The entire court held its breath. The fire waited for her command. The fire waited. Elara stood in the torchlit yard, hands raised, flames licking up her forearms like living bracelets. The court stared in frozen silence. Nobles clutched their mourning cloaks. Guards gripped swords that suddenly looked useless. Lord Aldrich's triumphant sneer faltered for the first time. She felt the power surge through her veins, raw and ancient, no longer a hesitant spark but a roaring river. The cut in her mouth burned, but the pain only fed the flames. For 6 years they had silenced her. Tonight the kingdom would hear her in the only language left. Vortigern stood 2 paces away, hands open at his sides, eyes locked on hers. No fear. Only a terrible, naked recognition. "Elara," he said, voice low enough for only her to hear. "This is what they wanted. Don't give it to them." She ignored him. With deliberate slowness, she turned her palms outward. The flames leaped higher, forming 2 blazing wings that cast long shadows across the stone yard. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A lady fainted. Someone screamed. The heat pushed the front line of guards back another step. Her heart hammered, shock at her own strength mixed with a fierce, heady empowerment. This was not the small circle on the dungeon floor. This was not the cracked chain. This was her, fully awake, in front of every person who had watched her tongue be cut and done nothing. She stepped forward. The remaining chain on her wrist had melted away completely in the heat. Iron droplets still glowed on the ground behind her. She raised one burning hand and pointed straight at Lord Aldrich. The advisor's face drained of color. "Seize her! She is the last of the cursed blood." His words died as Elara clenched her fist. A column of fire shot forward, not to kill but to strike the ground at his feet. Stone shattered. Flames roared upward in a controlled spiral, trapping him in a cage of heat and light. Aldrich stumbled back, cloak singeing at the edges. The public reveal had begun. She turned to the crowd. No voice, but she did not need one. She lifted both hands and let the fire paint pictures in the air above her head, images born from memory and power. The West Wing in flames 6 years ago, Ronan's face, young and terrified, reaching for her through smoke. The king younger, then standing over a body, blade in hand. The scenes flickered and shifted, imperfect, but unmistakable. Shock spread like plague. Whispers became shouts. "She's showing the truth. Ronan didn't die in an accident." The king lied. Vortigern moved. He grabbed her shoulder, spinning her to face him. His grip was hard, desperate. Up close she saw the toll on his face. Deep lines, eyes hollowed by years of carrying secrets alone. "Enough," he growled. "You don't know what you're unleashing." She shoved him again, harder this time. Flames licked across his chest without burning him. The fire knew him. It recognized the same blood that ran in her veins. That realization hit her like cold water in the middle of the blaze. He was connected. Not just protector. Not just betrayer. Family? Or something worse? The crowd pressed closer, emboldened by the drama. Guards looked uncertain, caught between loyalty to the king and terror of the burning girl. Elara made her choice. She broke free from Vortigern's grasp and walked straight toward the center of the yard. Every step left scorched footprints. The fire around her expanded into a wide circle, forcing the entire court to keep distance. In the middle of that burning ring she stopped, turned slowly, and met as many eyes as she could. Then she dropped to one knee and pressed both palms to the cold stone. The ground answered. A web of glowing cracks raced outward from her hands, spreading across the entire yard like lightning frozen in orange light. Ancient symbols flared to life runes she had never learned but somehow knew. The symbols of House Ronan. The symbols of a power the kingdom had tried to erase. Gasps turned to outright panic. An old lord fell to his knees. The lost sigil. It's real, Aldrich, still trapped in his cage of flame, roared. Kill her! Kill them both before she awakens the rest! Arrows flew. 3 shafts whistled toward her. Elara did not flinch. The fire surged up instinctively, melting the arrows into droplets of molten iron before they touched her. The droplets fell harmlessly at her feet. Empowerment flooded her chest, sharp and intoxicating. She rose slowly, arms spread wide. The flames around her shaped themselves into the image of a crown shattered in half, then reformed into 2 crowns joined by chains of fire. The message was clear. The throne was built on lies and blood, on silenced voices. Vortigern stepped into the burning circle with her. The fire parted for him. He stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, facing the court that now looked at both of them as monsters. His voice rang out, steady despite everything. You wanted truth tonight. Here it is. 6 years ago, Prince Ronan discovered a secret this kingdom was never meant to keep. Elara witnessed it. I silenced her to keep her alive. The power she carries is not a curse. It is the kingdom's forgotten heart. He looked at her then. In his amber eyes, she saw shock equal to her own at her strength, at how quickly everything had shattered, at the undeniable pull between them even now, in the middle of fire and betrayal. Elara met his gaze. For one heartbeat, the rage wavered. The man who had cut her tongue stood with her against the world. The same hands that had ordered her pain now shielded her from arrows. The conflict tore at her. She raised one hand again. This time the flames formed a final image above them both. Ronan's face, smiling the way he had in the orchard, then slowly consumed by darkness. The message burned bright for everyone to see. The court erupted. Guards charged. Aldrich broke free of his fiery cage, drawing a hidden dagger that glowed with its own dark light. The real fight had begun. Elara stood empowered, fire roaring through every vein, the public truth finally torn open for all to witness. But as the first wave of soldiers crashed against her flames, a new shock hit her harder than any blade. The fire inside her whispered a truth she had never suspected. Vortigern was not just protecting a secret, he was the secret, and the power she carried had once belonged to him. The first wave of guards crashed against the wall of flame. Elara stood at the center of the burning circle, power roaring through her like a storm finally unleashed. The catharsis hit deep, years of silenced rage pouring out in every flicker and surge. No more chains, no more hidden sparks in the dark. She was fire, and the kingdom was finally feeling it. Vortigern fought beside her. His blade moved in precise arcs, cutting down soldiers who dared cross the flames. But he no longer commanded. The fire answered only to her. She thrust her hands forward. A wave of heat slammed outward, knocking a dozen men off their feet. Their armor glowed red-hot. Screams rose into the night. The scent of scorched metal and sweat filled the yard. She felt no pity, only release. Aldrich lunged through the chaos, his dark dagger pulsing with unnatural shadow. He aimed for the king's back. Elara moved without thinking. She stepped between them, catching the blade with her bare palm. Pain flared white-hot, but the fire in her veins melted the edge on contact. The advisor staggered, eyes wide with disbelief. "You dare!" she rasped. The sound was broken, bloodied, but it carried. The court heard her ruined voice rise above the bells. Vortigern turned. For the first time, he looked at her not as protector or betrayer, but as equal, almost as threat. The power dynamic had flipped. She no longer needed his guidance. The runes on the ground pulsed brighter under her feet, feeding her strength. Ancient knowledge flooded her mind, memories that were not hers but lived in the blood. Ronan's final moments. The king's desperate choice 6 years ago. The secret that bound them all. She grabbed Vortigern by the front of his cloak and pulled him close inside the shrinking circle of fire. Flames danced around them both, shielding from arrows and advancing guards. Up close, his amber eyes burned with conflict. "Tell them," she demanded in that guttural whisper, "or I will burn the truth out of you." He did not resist. His hand covered hers on his cloak, not to pull away, but to hold. The touch sent a different kind of heat through her. Attraction and rage twisted together until she could barely breathe. "I silenced you to protect the throne," he said, voice raw for the whole court to hear. Ronan discovered that the power of the old bloodlines never died. It passed to me when my father tried to end it. I was meant to destroy it. Instead, I carried it. When you saw what happened that night, I had no choice. They would have killed you slowly if they knew you carried the same spark. Catharsis crashed over her. Tears mixed with the blood on her chin. 6 years of pain, of wondering why the boy she loved had died, why the king had looked at her with regret instead of hatred. It all broke open. She shoved him back, but not with full force. The fire around them fled higher, forming a dome that sealed them from the chaos outside. Guards pounded against it uselessly. Aldrich's shouts grew frantic. "You carried it," she rasped, each word tearing her throat. "You let them cut me, because you were afraid of what I would become." Vortigern's shoulders sagged. The proud king who had ruled with cold certainty now stood stripped before her and the court. "Yes, and because I could not bear to watch another person, He stopped. The unspoken word hung between them, heavy with subtext and longing. She felt it too. The unwanted pull. The way his presence had haunted her, even in the dungeon. The recognition of shared fire. Conflict tore through the catharsis. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to burn him where he stood. Instead, she stepped closer, flames licking harmlessly at his skin. Her burned palm pressed against his chest, over his heart. She could feel it racing beneath her touch. The court watched in stunned silence. The power had shifted completely. She was no longer the mute prisoner. He was no longer the untouchable king. They were two flames circling each other, bound by blood and betrayal and something far more dangerous. "Show me," she whispered. Vortigern closed his eyes. When he opened them, faint amber light glowed under his own skin, the same fire, weaker now, as if he had spent years suppressing it, but unmistakably hers. He lifted his hand. A small flame appeared in his palm, steady, controlled, but trembling. The dome of fire around them pulsed in response. Their powers recognized each other, merged. For one brief, shattering moment, Elara felt complete. The loneliness of 6 silent years eased. The wound of Ronan's death felt less jagged. She had found the other half of the fire she carried. Then reality crashed back. Aldrich smashed through the dome with a surge of shadow from his dagger. The barrier shattered. Guards poured in. The advisor's face twisted with fanatical hatred. "Abominations, both of you. The old blood must end tonight." An arrow struck Vortigern's shoulder. He grunted but stayed on his feet. Elara's rage reignited. She threw her arms wide. Flames exploded outward in a storm that cleared half the yard. Bodies flew. Stone cracked, but the cost was immediate. Her vision blurred. The power, still new and wild, drained her faster than she expected. Blood flowed freely from her mouth again. Her legs trembled. Vortigern caught her elbow, steadying her. The flip was complete. He now leaned on her strength as much as she had once depended on his protection. "We cannot win here," he said urgently. "Not like this. The real enemy is deeper. Aldrich serves the ones who tried to kill the bloodline entirely." Elara looked at the chaos around them. The court in panic. The flames dying at her fingertips. The king wounded, exposed, bound to her by fire and secrets, standing at her side, not as ruler, but as partner. She made her choice. She took his hand. Their palms met, fire to fire. A surge of combined power flared between them, bright enough to blind the nearest guards. Together they turned toward the palace gates. But as they ran, a new presence stirred in the shadows beyond the yard. Something older, hungrier. The true force behind the throne's lies had awakened. Elara felt it reach for her mind. Cold, ancient, whispering promises of despair wrapped in hope. The night was far from over. They ran. Elara gripped Vortigern's hand, their combined fire surging between their palms like a shared heartbeat. The palace gates loomed ahead, iron and shadow. Behind them, the yard burned. Shouts and screams faded into the roar of flames. Aldrich's voice cut through it all, shrill with fury. "You cannot outrun what you are." The wound in her mouth bled steadily now, copper flooding her throat with every ragged breath. Her legs burned from the drain of power, but she pushed harder. Vortigern staggered beside her, arrow still buried in his shoulder, blood soaking his cloak. Yet he matched her pace. Amber eyes locked forward. They burst through the gates into the outer bailey. Moonlight spilled across cobblestones slick with night dew. For one fragile moment, hope flickered. The forest lay beyond the outer wall. Freedom, answers, a chance to unravel the rest of the lies together. Then the ground split open. Black veins of shadow erupted from the earth, racing toward them like living roots. The ancient presence she had sensed earlier slammed into her mind, cold, vast, patient. It whispered in a voice made of forgotten graves and broken crowns. "You are mine." The last spark. "Come home." Elara stumbled. Despair crashed over her, heavier than any chain. Images flooded her. Ronan's body crumpling in the burning west wing. Her own tongue falling onto marble, 6 years of silence stretching into eternity. The fire inside her flickered, weakened by the shadow's touch. Vortigern pulled her upright. "Fight it. It feeds on doubt." She tried. She reached for the flame, for the warmth of his hand, for the memory of the orchard apple. But the shadow dug deeper. It showed her the truth in merciless clarity. Vortigern had not just silenced her. He had watched her suffer because the power they shared had driven his own father mad. It had killed Ronan. It would kill them both. Tears blurred her vision. The combined fire between their palms dimmed to faint embers. Guards poured from the gates behind them. Aldrich rode at their head, dark dagger raised high, its blade drinking moonlight. "You see now, girl," Aldrich shouted. "The old god beneath the throne has awakened. It demands the bloodline end. Your king kept you alive only to feed it when the time came." High stakes. Everything converged here. Elara dropped to one knee on the cold stone. Despair clawed at her throat. The shadow wrapped around her legs, pulling her down. Her free hand pressed to the ground, but the runes that had glowed so brightly before now sputtered and died. She felt the ancient force coiling tighter, promising an end to pain if she would only surrender the fire. Let it consume her. Let it consume them both. Vortigern knelt beside her. His wounded shoulder bled freely. He cupped her face with his bloodied hand, forcing her to look at him. His voice was rough, stripped of royal distance. "Elara, listen to me. 6 years ago I chose the kingdom over everything. I was wrong. Ronan died because I was too afraid to share this burden. But you woke the fire in me again, not as weapon, as hope." His thumb brushed her scarred lip. The touch was gentle, desperate. In his amber eyes she saw the boy he had once been, the one who stood beside Ronan in the orchard, carrying the same weight. The man who had come alone to her cell, not to threaten, but because he could no longer stay away. The shadow hissed in her mind. "Lies. He will betray you again." She wavered. The despair was so deep it felt like drowning. Her body trembled. The last embers between their hands threatened to go out. Then she made her choice. With a broken scream that tore what remained of her voice, Elara slammed her palm against Vortigern's chest, right over his heart. She pushed every fragment of fire she had left into him. Not to burn, to awaken, to remind. Their powers collided. The combined flame exploded outward in a brilliant column of gold and amber light. The shadow veins recoiled, shrieking. The ground cracked wider. But this time, the light poured into the fissure, pushing back the darkness. For a heartbeat, the entire bailey lit up as if dawn had come early. Aldrich's horse reared. The advisor screamed as the light seared his face. Elara rose, pulling Vortigern with her. Their hands remained locked. The fire no longer drained her alone. It flowed between them stronger, balanced, alive. Hope, fragile but real, sparked in her chest. They could end this, together. They could rebuild what the shadow had broken. But the cost came swift. The ancient presence roared in fury. The ground heaved violently. A massive tendril of pure shadow erupted directly beneath them, wrapping around Vortigern's waist. It yanked him backward toward the widening chasm. "Elara!" he shouted, gripping her hand tighter. She held on, heels skidding across stone. The fire in her veins blazed white-hot, burning the shadow where it touched her skin. But the pull was immense. The entity wanted him its original vessel. It would drag him down into the depths beneath the palace and leave her alone with the ashes. Guards closed in. Aldrich, face burned and twisted, raised his dagger for a final strike. Elara looked at Vortigern, blood on his shoulder, fire in his eyes. The man who had taken everything from her and given her back her power in the same breath. She would not let the shadow have him. With her free hand she summoned the last of their combined strength. A spear of pure flame formed in her palm bright enough to banish the night. She hurled it not at Aldrich, but at the base of the shadow tendril. The explosion rocked the bailey. Stone shattered. The tendril loosened for one critical second. Vortigern surged forward. He wrapped his arms around her, shielding her body with his own as they stumbled away from the edge. But the shadow struck one final time, lashing across his back. Digging deep, he gasped against her neck. His weight sagged. Despair and hope warred violently inside her. She felt his heartbeat falter against her chest. The fire between them flickered dangerously low. Aldrich laughed, advancing with the remaining guards. The chasm groaned wider, ready to swallow them all. Elara held the wounded king upright, flames sputtering at her fingertips. The ancient shadow whispered one last promise in her mind. "Surrender him, and you may live." She pressed her ruined mouth to Vortigern's temple, tasting blood and pine and the faint trace of winter that was only his. She would not surrender. But as the guards charged and the ground split further beneath their feet, she did not know if either of them would survive the final stand. The shadow tendril tightened around Vortigern's waist, dragging him toward the chasm's edge. Elara locked her arms around him, their joined hands still burning with the last of their shared fire. Blood from his back soaked her front. His breath came in shallow bursts against her neck. She would not let go. With a guttural cry that tore what remained of her throat, she slammed her free hand against the ground. The fire answered one final time, not wild, not desperate, but deliberate. It poured through their connection, gold and amber light surging into the shadow. The tendril shrieked, black smoke curling away as the flame burned it from the inside. Vortigern gasped as the grip loosened. She pulled him forward, both of them collapsing several paces from the widening crack. Aldrich charged, dark dagger raised high. The old god will have its due. Elara rose first. She stepped in front of the wounded king, palms open. The fire between them steadied. No longer a storm, but a quiet, enduring blaze. She met the advisor's eyes and pushed. A single, focused lance of flame struck the dagger. The blade shattered. Shadow and fire collided in a silent explosion that threw Aldrich backward into the remaining guards. They fell in a tangle of armor and fear. The ground trembled once more, then stilled. The ancient presence retreated with a final, fading whisper, defeated not by raw power, but by the bond it could not break. The chasm began to close, stone grinding over stone until only a jagged scar remained across the bailey. Silence fell. Elara turned to Vortigern. He leaned against a broken pillar, one hand pressed to the deep wound on his back, amber eyes dim but open. She knelt beside him. Her fingers trembled as she touched the torn cloak, then the torn skin beneath. The fire in her veins flowed gently now, sealing the worst of the bleeding, knitting flesh where it could. He caught her wrist. Not to stop her, to hold. "You chose me," he whispered, "even after everything I took from you." She nodded. No words left, only the press of her scarred mouth to his forehead, the taste of blood and pine and sweat, the warmth of his skin against hers. 6 years of silence, of rage, of hidden longing, finally met in this quiet ruin. Vortigern pulled her closer. Their foreheads touched. The fire between their palms softened to a single steady glow, no longer weapon or curse but bridge. In that light, she saw the boy. He had been the one who had stood beside Ronan and tried to carry a burden too heavy for any crown. She saw the man who had chosen isolation over watching her die. "I silenced you to keep you alive," he said, voice rough. "But I kept myself in the dark, too. Forgive me, little shadow, or don't. Just stay." Tears slipped down her cheeks, mixing with the blood on her chin. She pressed her ruined mouth to his. The kiss was not gentle. It was earned salt and fire, and years of unsaid things. His hand cupped the back of her neck, careful of the pain, pulling her deeper. In that moment the wounds did not vanish. Her voice would never return. His shoulder would ache in the cold. The kingdom lay in chaos behind them, old gods broken but new scars fresh. Yet something healed. When they parted, the glow between them dimmed to embers that settled beneath their skin. The power did not disappear. It simply rested, shared now, quieter, theirs to carry together instead of alone. Dawn crept over the palace walls. The surviving guards and scattered nobles watched from a distance, uncertain whether to bow or flee. The court that had witnessed her tongue cut now witnessed a king and the woman he had broken standing side by side, fire still flickering faintly around their joined hands. Elara helped Vortigern to his feet. He leaned on her without shame. She bore his weight without resentment. Together they walked past the scarred yard, past the melted chains and broken runes, toward the palace that no longer felt like a prison. Behind them, the first light touched the blackened stone where she had once carved Ronan's name in a dungeon. She paused, turning to look. A soft warmth bloomed in her chest. Not erasure of grief, but acceptance. The boy who had given her an apple in the orchard would never return. But the fire he had unknowingly awakened lived on in her. In them, Vortigern brushed a strand of hair from her face, thumb tracing the scar at the corner of her mouth. "We will tell the truth," he said. "All of it. The kingdom will change. It will hurt. But we face it together." She smiled then. Small, crooked, real. The fire answered with a gentle pulse beneath her ribs, warm, steady, no longer raging. They walked on. The night had taken her voice, her innocence, and the boy she once loved. But it had given her back something fiercer, a partner forged in the same flame, a love hard, won through betrayal and blood, and the quiet strength to carry both the darkness and the light. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows over the ruined bailey, Elara Voss leaned into King Vortigern's side and knew, at last, that she was no longer silent. She was heard.